Retirement has a strange way of surprising us. We spend 30, 40 years working toward it, counting down the days, promising ourselves that everything we've postponed will finally begin. We save, we plan, we sacrifice, believing that if we just make it to the finish line, happiness will be waiting there for us. But what if I told you the finish line is the trap, that the people who struggle most in retirement are often the ones who wanted it most badly? It's not about working longer. It's about understanding what you're actually retiring into. My name's Bill. I worked for 35 years. I've been retired long enough to have made about half the mistakes I'm going to describe today. And this channel is where we tell the truth about life after the gold watch, the stuff the retirement seminars leave out. Let's be honest about this from the start. They'll show you the beach and the grandkids and the golf course. They will not show you this. For decades now, researchers have been sitting with people at the end of their lives, at Cornell, at Harvard, in hospice rooms, and asking them one simple question. What do you regret? And their answers have almost nothing to do with money. That's exactly what we're exploring today. The regrets that follow people into retirement, and the psychology that lets you avoid every single one of them in your purpose, your relationships, and your peace of mind. Because if you're approaching retirement with a quiet knot of dread underneath the excitement, or you're already there and wondering why it doesn't feel the way the brochures promised, there's a reason for that. This isn't another video about pensions and portfolios. This is about something deeper. What actually makes the last third of life the best third? And if you stay until the end, you'll walk away seeing your own retirement, whether it's behind you or ahead of you, in a completely different way. Before we begin, one simple favor. If this kind of thinking matters to you, take a second and subscribe. It costs nothing, and it helps these ideas reach the people who need them most. Let's begin. Number 1. They retired from something, not to something. Have you ever noticed how people talk about retirement? Escaping the commute, escaping the meetings, escaping the alarm clock. It's always escape, always from, and almost never to. We spend years dreaming about what we're leaving behind and almost no time deciding what we're walking toward. And for a while that works. The gerontologist Robert Ashley, who spent his career studying how people actually adjust to retirement, mapped out the phases almost everyone moves through. First comes what he called the honeymoon, that euphoric stretch where you finally do everything you never had time for. The trips, the golf, the slow mornings. But Ashley found that the honeymoon has an expiration date, and what follows it, he named with an honest word. Disenchantment. The trips end, the projects run out, and one ordinary Tuesday, you wake up with nothing on the calendar and a question you can't shake. Is this it? In other words, escape is a plan for about 18 months. It is not a plan for 30 years. Think of two teachers who retire on the same day. The first one retires from teaching. She's done, she's out, she burns the lesson plans. 6 months later, the celebration has faded, and so has she. The second one retires to something. She's finally going to mentor young teachers 2 mornings a week on her own terms. Same job, same pension, same day. Completely different second act. One of them lost a schedule. The other one found a mission. And before you decide the answer is geography, plenty of people try to solve this with a moving van. They retire from the cold, from the traffic, from the old house, and they buy the dream somewhere sunny. And for a season it works, because novelty always works for a season. But a new zip code is still a from. The sun comes up on the same unanswered question it rose on back home, just with better weather. You can't relocate your way out of purposelessness. You can only build your way out of it. The same pattern shows up in marriages, by the way. Couples who only plan the escape, the cruise, the beach house, often find themselves sitting across from each other afterward like strangers, because the escape was the whole conversation. The couples who thrive are the ones who chose something to build together next. So how do you practice this? First, write down what you're retiring to in one sentence before you write a single line about what you're retiring from. Second, test drive it now. Whatever you think your retirement purpose is, spend 1 weekend a month actually doing it, because fantasies don't survive contact with Tuesdays. And finally, plan your first 18 months differently than the rest. Front load the celebration, but know the honeymoon ends and have the next thing waiting. Retirement isn't an exit, it's an entrance. Number 2, they let their identity retire with the job title. For most of your adult life, there's been a ready-made answer to the most common question in the world. What do you do? And then one day the answer is gone. Have you ever watched someone introduce themselves after they retire? There's a pause, a small hesitation, and then something like, well, I used to be. It's a quiet moment, but it's heavy, isn't it? Because what's really being said is the person I was has ended, and I'm not sure who this new one is. But here's the thing, your title was never your identity. It was just the container your identity lived in for a few decades. On the island of Okinawa, home to some of the longest-lived people ever studied, the researcher Dan Buttner found something remarkable. By his account, the elders there don't even have an everyday word for retirement the way we use it. What they have instead is ikigai, which translates roughly as the reason I wake up in the morning. A 90-year-old fisherman still has an ikigai. A great-grandmother still has an ikigai. The role changes. The reason never does. In other words, they never tied their worth to a job in the first place, so there was nothing to lose when the job ended. Now picture two executives, both retiring from the same company, the same week. The first one was his calendar. Every ounce of his identity lived in the meetings, the decisions, the being needed. When the calendar emptied, so did he, and within a year he was calling old colleagues just to feel relevant. The second one had always kept a thread running outside the office, the woodworking, the church finance committee, the grandkids' science projects. His title retired. He didn't. And identity isn't only about how you introduce yourself at parties. It reaches into your closest rooms. Because when the sense of being needed disappears at work, people often try to replace it at home, all at once, and it lands on a spouse like weather. Reorganizing a kitchen that ran perfectly well for 30 years. Supervising errands no one asked to have supervised. That's not controlling behavior. That's an identity looking for somewhere to live. Naming that kindly and early spares a marriage years of quiet friction. So how do you protect your identity? First, answer the question, who am I, without mentioning a single job, past or present. If you can't, that's not a failure. That's your starting point. Second, build one role now that no employer can take from you. Mentor, gardener, historian of the family, elder of the neighborhood. Roles retire people. Identities don't. And finally, when someone asks what you do, practice answering with what you love, not what you were paid for. Your career was a chapter. It was never the book. Number 3, they postponed living until it felt safe. There's a sentence that should frighten all of us more than it does. We'll do that someday. Someday when the kids are grown. Someday when the mortgage is paid. Someday when things settle down. We treat our real lives like a reward we haven't earned yet, and we keep pushing the date. And the years, quietly, keep accepting the postponement. The Australian nurse Bronnie Ware spent years in palliative care, sitting with people in their final weeks, and she wrote down what they told her. The most common regret, the one she heard more than any other, was this: I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Read that again. Not a life of more money, not a life of more safety, a life true to myself. The philosopher Seneca saw the same thing 2,000 years earlier. It is not that we have a short time to live, he wrote, but that we waste a lot of it. But here's what makes this a retirement problem, specifically. Deferral is a habit, and habits don't retire when you do. The person who spent 40 years saying someday doesn't suddenly become spontaneous at 65. They keep deferring, except now the excuses are new. When the market recovers. When my knee is better. When the grandkids are older. Have you felt that pull already? Imagine a woman who always wanted to paint. At 30, there was no time. At 50, there was no energy. At 65, there's finally time and energy. And now there's a new voice saying, it's too late to start, you'd only embarrass yourself. Same voice, new costume. It was never about the time, it was about the permission. And deferral has one more disguise worth naming: preparation. There are people who research the dream endlessly, the courses, the gear, the perfect conditions, because studying the diving board feels almost like jumping and risks nothing. A man can own a beautiful guitar for 20 years and never once be a beginner on it. The guitar was never the obstacle. Being seen starting from zero was. But every single person you admire was once embarrassingly new at the thing you admire them for. The dream doesn't need more research. It needs a first bad Tuesday. Let me tell you about a couple. I'll call them Ray and Carol. And if those aren't their real names, it doesn't matter because you know this couple. Everyone knows this couple. Ray hung a map of the United States on the garage wall the year he turned 50. He traced the whole route in yellow highlighter, down the coast of Oregon, across the desert at Flagstaff, up through the Smoky Mountains in October when the leaves turn, all of it, 4 months, one big loop around the country in an RV they were going to buy the day he retired. For 15 years, that map hung there. When the furnace acted up, Ray fixed it standing next to that map. When money got tight, they'd stand in the garage and touch the route like a promise. That map heard 15 years of when the pension vests, when the trucks paid off, when your mother settled, when things calmed down at the plant. And here's the part that should make you sit very still. Ray did retire. The party happened, the gold watch happened, and then the deferrals kept coming, except now they were smaller and more reasonable sounding than ever. Let's wait until spring, the passes are icy. Let's wait until the RV prices come down. It's a terrible market. Let's wait until after Carol's hip appointment, just to be sensible. 2 years went by that way, sensibly. And then one morning at breakfast, Ray had a stroke. Not the kind that kills you, the kind that rearranges you, the kind that means Carol drives now, and long trips are over, and the word someday quietly changes its meaning from a promise into a wound. I want to be careful here because this is the moment where you might expect me to say they never went. They went. Carol rented them a little RV the next fall anyway, and they drove exactly one piece of that yellow line, the Smoky Mountains in October, 11 days, slow, with a handicap placard and a cooler of ginger ale. Ray cried at an overlook in Tennessee and pretended it was the wind. And when they got home, Carol stood in the garage, looked at that map with its one small stretch of highlighter they'd actually driven, and said the sentence I have never been able to forget. We owned this whole trip for 40 years. We just never gave ourselves permission to take it. Notice what the obstacle never was. It was never the money. They had the money. It was never really the time. It was that deferral had become who they were, and no calendar, not even a wide-open retired one, can fix an identity. The 11 days they finally took were not a defeat. Those 11 days were, Carol says, the best of their marriage. That's the twist the deferral habit hides from you. The dream almost always survives in some form. Smaller, slower, adapted, but alive, and still worth taking. What doesn't survive is the perfect version you were waiting to be safe enough to deserve. So don't hear this story as a warning about strokes. Hear it as a question about garages. What's hanging on the wall of yours, and how long has it been hanging there? So how do you break the deferral habit? First, make a list of everything filed under someday and put a date on the 3 that matter most. Not a season, a date. Second, do the smallest version of the dream this month. Don't move to Italy. Book the Italian class on Thursday nights. Deferral survives on the size of the dream. Shrink the first step until it can't hide. And finally, ask the question where's patience answered too late. If I keep living exactly as I am, what will I regret? Then let the answer rearrange your calendar. Someday is not a date on any calendar. It never was. Number 4. They regretted the chances they didn't take, not the ones they did. Ask yourself something. What stings longer, the embarrassing thing you did or the brave thing you didn't? In the 1990s, 2 Cornell psychologists, Thomas Gilovich and Victoria Medvec, set out to study regret properly. They surveyed people, interviewed retired professors, sat with residents of nursing homes, and they found a pattern so consistent it now has a name: the temporal pattern of regret. In the short run, we regret our actions. The awkward conversation, the failed venture, the risk that went wrong. Those burn hot and then they fade. But in the long run, over years and decades, the pattern flips completely. What people regret most at the end is overwhelmingly what they didn't do. The business never started. The words never said. The move never made. In other words, action regrets heal. Inaction regrets compound, like interest. And the psychologist offered a reason why. When you act and it goes badly, reality closes the case. You know exactly what it cost. And you learn something. You make peace with a fact. But the road not taken never closes. The imagination is free to furnish it forever, and it always furnishes it perfectly. The business that was never opened never fails. The love that was never risked never disappoints, which is precisely why it never stops aching. And retirement is where all that compounded interest comes due, because for the first time in decades, there's silence enough to hear it. But here's the thing, this same pattern is also the best news in this entire video. Because if inaction is what we regret, then the cure is almost embarrassingly simple. It's not success, it's attempts. Picture two men, both 70, both once dreamed of opening a little repair shop. The first one tried it at 66. It broke even for 2 years and closed. Ask him about it and he laughs, tells you stories, shows you the sign he kept from the door. The second man never tried. Ask him about it and he changes the subject. One of them has a memory, the other one has a ghost. And notice the failure isn't the painful one. This is true in relationships too. The apology you're avoiding, the sibling you haven't called in 9 years. No one lies on their deathbed regretting that they reached out and it was awkward. So how do you get on the right side of the pattern? First, name the one risk you've been circling for years. Say it out loud and tell someone about it, because spoken intentions are harder to shelve. Second, redefine the win. The win is not the shop succeeding. The win is being the person who opened it. And finally, when you're weighing a chance, don't ask what happens if it goes wrong. Ask, how will this feel as a story I never get to tell? You will survive your failures. It's your ghosts that never leave. Number 5. They let their relationships thin out, one missed call at a time. No one decides to become lonely. It happens the way a garden goes wild, not through one dramatic choice, but through 1,000 small seasons of not tending. And retirement, for all its gifts, is the single biggest untended season of them all. Because here's what nobody tells you about leaving work. You're not just leaving tasks. You're leaving the people you saw 5 days a week without ever having to schedule them. The hallway conversations, the lunch table, the complaining by the coffee machine. All of it was friendship on autopilot. And the day you retire, the autopilot shuts off. Since 1938, Harvard has been running the longest study of adult life ever conducted, following hundreds of people from youth into old age for more than 85 years. Its current director, the psychiatrist Robert Waldinger, summarizes 8 decades of data in one sentence. The people who stayed happiest and healthiest were the ones with the warmest relationships. Not the richest, not the most accomplished. The study found that good relationships don't just protect your mood. They track with healthier bodies and sharper minds deep into old age. In other words, connection isn't the decoration on a good retirement. It's the foundation. It's not soft science. It's the strongest predictor we have. Think of 2 neighbors, both retired 5 years. The first one waited for a connection to happen to him, the way it always had. It didn't, because it couldn't. His world narrowed to the television and the pharmacy. The second one treated people like his new profession. Coffee with a former colleague every Tuesday, the walking group, the standing Sunday call with his brother. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just tended. 5 years on, these 2 men are living in different universes. And it matters in your closest relationships too. A marriage that suddenly gets 40 extra hours a week together needs new rituals, not just proximity. And a word to the men in particular, because the pattern tends to be harsher there. Many men reach retirement with a social life that was entirely employer-provided, friendships that lived at work the way plants live in a greenhouse. Lose the building and everything wilts at once. Women more often have been tending the garden all along. Men often discover at 65 that they never learned how. If that's you, it isn't a character flaw. It's a skill you simply haven't needed until now. And like any skill, it starts clumsy and gets easier. So how do you tend the garden? First, schedule people the way you used to schedule meetings. It sounds unromantic. It's the opposite. What gets scheduled survives. Second, replace the workplace. Don't just mourn it. You need one place, a club, a volunteer crew, a class where people simply expect you weekly. Being expected is half of belonging. And finally, reach one layer deeper. Once a month, tell one person something true instead of something pleasant. Loneliness isn't the absence of people, it's the absence of tending. Number 6, they spent their best decade worrying about things that never happen. Here's a quiet tragedy that shows up in study after study. People finally reach the freedom they worked 40 years for, and then they spend it rehearsing disasters. Will the money last? What if my health breaks? What if something happens to the kids? The circumstances finally allow peace, and the mind declines the invitation. It's exhausting, isn't it? The gerontologist Carl Pillemer at Cornell spent years running what he called the Legacy Project, gathering the life wisdom of well over 1,000 Americans in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. He expected their great regrets to be affairs, business failures, dramatic mistakes. What he heard instead, over and over, in almost the same words, was this: I wish I hadn't spent so much of my life worrying. These were people who had actually lived through wars, recessions, and losses, and their verdict on worry was unanimous. At best, it wasted their time. At worst, it doubled their suffering, making them live the disaster twice. Once in imagination and once, occasionally, in fact. And here's the detail that changes everything. The elders weren't telling people to relax and hope. Pillemer found their antidote to worry wasn't optimism, it was action. Concrete, unglamorous preparation. In other words, you don't argue with anxiety, you outplan it. Picture two women, both 68, both with the same pension and the same aches. The first one checks her account balance daily like a heart monitor, reads every frightening headline, and treats each twinge as a diagnosis. Her retirement is technically secure and spiritually ruined. The second one did something different. She sat down once, faced the worst cases squarely, made her plan, wrote it down, and then gave herself permission to stop redeciding it. Same risks, same world. One of them worries as a lifestyle, the other prepared as an event. There's a name for what the first woman is doing, and it isn't caution, it's rehearsal. Every anxious loop is a full dress rehearsal of a tragedy that hasn't been scheduled, complete with the racing heart and the tight chest, and the body pays full price for every performance. The elder's insight was that you can decline the role, not by pretending nothing bad will ever happen. Things will happen. But when they do, you'll handle the real version better with the resources the rehearsals only drain. So how do you take the elder's advice? First, give every recurring worry one honest hour. Get the facts, make the plan, put it on paper. Worry is vague on purpose. Plans are specific on purpose. Second, contain the checking. The news, the balances, the symptoms. Once a week is information. Once an hour is self-harm. And finally, when the what-if voice starts, answer it with the elder's question. Is this happening right now, today? Because today, almost always, you are fine. Worry is not preparation. It's just suffering in advance. Number 7. They waited to be done when the point was never to be done. And this is where everything we've talked about comes together, because there's a paradox at the center of retirement that almost nobody resolves. You spent your whole life being told to finish. Finish school, finish the career, finish the mortgage. So you arrive at retirement believing it's the great finishing, the state of being finally permanently done. And then the strangest thing happens. Done feels terrible. The rest you dreamed of turns to restlessness in about a year, and you wonder what's wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. You've simply discovered what the research has been saying all along. Remember Ashley's phases? Disenchantment isn't the end of his map. After it comes reorientation, the phase where retirees stop trying to be done and start building a life with rhythm in it again. Structure, purpose, people, rest, repeat. The ones who reach stability aren't the ones who escaped effort. They're the ones who chose their effort, finally, freely, for the first time in their lives. The Okinawan elders never needed the correction because they never believed in done. The fisherman slows down. He doesn't stop being a fisherman. The reason to wake up doesn't retire. It just changes clothes. In other words, you were never tired of effort. You were tired of effort that wasn't yours. Rest is a rhythm, not a destination. Think of it like music. What you wanted was never for the song to stop. What you wanted was to finally choose the song. Silence isn't peace. Silence is just silence. Peace is the right music at the right volume, and for the first time ever, you are holding the dial. You see it in the retirees everyone secretly envies. The 80-year-old who keeps bees badly, happily. The retired nurse who reads to second graders every Thursday and guards that hour like an appointment with a president. None of it is impressive on a resume, and none of it is meant to be. It's chosen effort, sized to a life, and it does what 30 years of salary never quite did. It makes the morning necessary. So how do you live the paradox? First, keep one thing in your week that's slightly hard on purpose. One thing you could quit and choose not to. That choice is where dignity lives. Second, build your week like a rhythm, not a void. Anchors on the calendar, rest in between, so that leisure stays sweet instead of becoming fog. And finally, retire the word done entirely. Replace it with next, at whatever size and speed you choose. Because a good retirement was never the end of the story. It's the part where you finally get to write it. So let's return to where we started. The finish line was the trap, but only because we had it backwards. You were never running toward an ending. All those years, you were running towards a beginning, the first season of your life that is entirely, unapologetically yours. Stop retiring from your life and start retiring into it. The regrets are all avoidable. The nurses told us. The elders told us. 85 years of Harvard data told us. Purpose over titles. People over balances. Attempts over ghosts. Plans over worry. So take a breath. You have more time than your fear says and less than your someday pretends. And that's not a warning. That's the invitation. If this changed how you see retirement, there's another video on your screen right now that goes even deeper into the psychology of a well-lived later life. And if you haven't already, subscribe so the next insight finds you. Until then, choose your song.